Welcome to the Hidden Truths, where the most intimate mysteries come to life. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss a secret. Now, let's pull back the veil. My name is Claire, and from the outside, my life was flawless. I had the perfect marriage, a beautiful home, 2 healthy children, and a career in interior design that others envied. My friends admired my elegance, and I had the life that many only dreamt of. People used to tell me how lucky I was, how perfect my life seemed. But no one ever saw behind the closed doors. James was my husband, and for the longest time, I believed we had the perfect relationship. We met in college, both ambitious, driven, and head over heels in love with each other. We shared the same values, the same vision for the future, and I thought we would always be that way. We built our lives together. We had children, a beautiful home, and an idealistic view of what the future held. James was everything I needed, a loving partner, a devoted father, and a successful businessman. I was proud of him. I was proud of us. But as with all things that seem perfect, the cracks began to appear slowly, almost imperceptibly. First, it was small things. He started working late more often. He'd leave for business trips without much notice. He was distracted. When I asked him about it, he would tell me it was just the pressure of work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At first, I ignored it. I focused on my own career and the responsibilities of raising our children. But over time, the distance between us grew, and I began to feel it more acutely. The conversations that once flowed easily between us started to feel forced. We were no longer the same couple that once shared everything. I started to wonder if I was just a part of the perfect picture James had been painting all these years, a part of the illusion. But I didn't dare question it. Until one night, when I found something I wasn't supposed to see. I came home early from a client meeting, wanting to surprise James with dinner. The house was unusually quiet, which was odd because he'd always be home before me, especially on a Friday. When I walked into the living room, I noticed his phone on the coffee table. It was face up, something James would never do. He was protective of his privacy. For some reason, I felt compelled to glance at it. The phone screen lit up with a message, a text from someone named Emma. I didn't recognize the name, and the content of the message sent a chill down my spine. I miss you. I can't wait to see you again this weekend. You know I love you. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't a work-related text. This wasn't an innocent message. Something was going on. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled through more of their conversations, messages about secret meetings, hotel bookings, plans to meet while I was away on business. I couldn't breathe. I sat down on the couch, staring at the screen, the weight of the betrayal crashing down on me. James was cheating on me. And I had no idea how long it had been going on. For the next few hours, I could barely think. I couldn't focus. The world around me felt distant and hollow. I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was some explanation I wasn't seeing. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This was a betrayal, plain and simple. When James finally walked through the door, he seemed surprised to see me sitting there, the phone still in my hand. Claire? What's going on? His voice was filled with that familiar warmth, but now it felt foreign to me. I couldn't look him in the eye. Instead, I stared at the phone in my hands, my knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. Who is Emma? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James froze, his face suddenly pale. He didn't say anything at first. The silence between us was suffocating. I knew the truth, and he knew I knew it. Hi, Claire, it's not what you think, he said, his voice cracking. Please, just let me explain. The truth came out in bits and pieces. James had been having an affair with Emma, a woman he had met through work. He confessed that it had started innocently enough, a dinner, a few late-night texts, but it quickly escalated into something more. He told me that he was sorry, that he never meant to hurt me, but his apologies felt hollow. His words meant nothing. I sat there in disbelief as he explained how much he loved me, how he never intended for this to happen, but somehow it did. I couldn't hear him anymore. His voice was just background noise. The only thing that mattered was the overwhelming sense of betrayal coursing through me. How long had this been going on? How many lies had he told? In that moment, everything felt broken. The image of our perfect life, the one I had worked so hard to create, was gone. It had all been a lie. The days following the revelation were a blur of confusion and numbness. I couldn't focus on anything, couldn't process the anger, the hurt, the disbelief. James had admitted it, but somehow it didn't make sense. The man I had spent years building a life with, the man I thought I knew inside and out, had been living a lie. He had been having an affair with Emma for months, while I, the wife, was left to play the role of the perfect partner. I had been a fool, trusting him, believing every word he said, every promise he made. But in the end, none of it mattered. I had been invisible to him, just another part of the picture he had so carefully crafted. As the days passed, I found myself lost in my own head. The conversations with James had been nothing but empty apologies, but the truth was clear now. I wasn't the one he wanted. He had chosen someone else. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. The anger began to rise inside me. I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. The betrayal was too deep, too painful, to ignore. But I had to be careful. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I wasn't going to let him think he could walk away unscathed. But what could I do? The life I had known was gone, and I had no idea how to fix it, how to move forward. I started with small steps. I distanced myself from James, no longer pretending that we were the perfect couple. The conversations became short, polite, but there was no warmth left between us. The house that had once been filled with laughter and love now felt like a prison. Every moment with him felt suffocating. And then, one evening, I found myself sitting in front of the computer, going through the emails. Something told me to dig deeper, to search for answers. It wasn't enough to just know about Emma. I needed to understand everything: how long this had been going on, what he had been hiding, and how much of our life had been built on deception. I opened his email account, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. I knew this was a violation of his privacy, but he had already violated me. He had already crossed the line, and I was just returning the favor. I scrolled through the emails, looking for any trace of Emma. And I found it. There were dozens of emails between them, talking about future plans, about trips they had taken together, about moments that were shared in secrecy. The worst part? There were plans for the future, plans where James had promised her that he would leave me. He had told her that he was going to leave our marriage, that he was just waiting for the right time. He had lied to both of us, kept us both in the dark while playing his game. And I had been the fool who believed him. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't just let him get away with this. I had to take control of my own life again. I had spent years supporting his career, building a family, building his dream. But now it was time for me to build my own. I started by contacting a lawyer. I wasn't sure where this would lead, but I knew I couldn't stay in this marriage any longer. I didn't want his apologies. I didn't want his promises. I wanted justice. I wanted to make him feel what I had felt: the hurt, the betrayal, the crushing weight of knowing that someone you trusted with your heart had thrown it away. But as I made the call, as I set the wheels in motion, a strange thing happened. Instead of the anger that had been boiling inside me, I felt a sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to sit by and let James and Emma destroy everything I had worked for. The next few days were filled with phone calls, meetings with my lawyer, and the slow process of untangling the life I had built. The house was up for sale. My name was being cleared of any wrongdoing. I made sure to get everything I could out of the divorce, my share of the assets, my part of the business. I wasn't going to let James walk away with everything, not after everything he had done. And I wasn't going to let him control the narrative. I would expose him for what he really was. Not just a cheater, but a liar, a manipulator who had built his life on the suffering of others. But I wasn't done with him yet. I wanted him to understand the full extent of what he had done, to feel the consequences of his actions in a way that would leave a lasting impact. The affair was only the beginning. I began to take small steps to ruin his reputation. I started spreading rumors, speaking to people I knew in the business world about his underhanded tactics. I made sure that anyone who had once trusted him now knew the truth. I leaked details of his affair to a few of his business partners, to his friends. It didn't take long for people to start distancing themselves from him. I wasn't going to stop there. I was going to take everything. His reputation. His business. His life. He had taken so much from me, and now it was my turn to make him pay. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in the house that was no longer mine. James had gone, leaving me with the remnants of our life together. He was off with Emma, planning their future, while I was left to pick up the pieces. But as I sat there, staring at the empty rooms, I realized something. I had taken back control. The power was no longer his. It was mine. I received a message from James a few days later. He asked to meet. He wanted to apologize, to try to explain himself. But I wasn't interested in hearing any more apologies. He had made his choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. I agreed to meet him, but I was done playing the role of the forgiving wife. This wasn't about closure anymore. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about justice. When we met, I could see the desperation in his eyes. He had nothing left to cling to, and he knew it. His career was ruined. His relationship with Emma was faltering. And now, I was the one with all the power. He tried to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but I didn't let him finish. "I'm done with you, James," I said, my voice steady cold. "You thought you could keep living this life of lies, but now you're going to face the consequences. You've taken everything from me, and now I'm taking everything from you." The days following my final confrontation with James were a blur. I had taken everything from him. His career, his reputation, his relationships, they were all in ruins. I had succeeded in making him feel the weight of his betrayal. But as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I couldn't help but wonder if it was enough. Revenge had always felt like the answer. I told myself that bringing James to his knees would give me peace, that it would heal the deep wound his infidelity had carved into my heart. But instead, all I felt was emptiness. The satisfaction of seeing him lose everything didn't bring me the comfort I had imagined. Instead, I felt like I had become someone I didn't recognize. James had begged me for forgiveness when we met in that restaurant, his voice breaking with the weight of his guilt. But I hadn't cared. He had shattered my world, and I had no intention of letting him off the hook so easily. And yet, as I sat there, I realized that it wasn't just his world that had crumbled. Mine had, too. The woman I had become in my quest for revenge, calculating, ruthless, wasn't someone I liked. I had sacrificed my own happiness in the pursuit of justice. The next morning, I awoke with a heavy heart. I had spent the night turning over the events in my head, replaying every moment of the past few weeks. The lies, the betrayals, the anger, all of it had consumed me, and now I was left with nothing. I had won, but at what cost? I couldn't stay in this apartment forever. I couldn't keep running from the truth. I needed to find a way to rebuild my life, but that would require something I hadn't yet figured out: how to move on. I had nothing left. James was gone, his reputation destroyed. My business, which had once been the pride of my life, was in shambles. But I had a plan. A new direction. I would rebuild my career, my life. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone. I spent the next few weeks starting over. I reached out to old colleagues in the design industry, people who had once supported me before everything fell apart. Slowly, I began to rebuild my professional life, one small step at a time. I started taking on smaller projects, regaining my confidence, working hard to show the world that I wasn't the woman I had once been. But as I worked, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. I had done what I set out to do, but now I was left to face the aftermath. The people I had once trusted were gone. My friends, my business associates, the people I thought I had relationships with, everything felt fragile. I couldn't trust anyone. I couldn't trust myself. It was during one of my meetings with a potential client that I first saw him again, James. I had been sitting in a cafe, finalizing the details of a new project, when I saw him walking toward me. My heart skipped a beat as I watched him approach, his face lined with exhaustion and regret. He looked different, worn down. The man who had once seemed so confident, so invincible, now appeared broken. "Claire," he said quietly, standing a few feet away from my table. "We need to talk." I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to hear his apologies, his excuses. I had heard it all before. But as I looked at him, I saw something I hadn't expected: vulnerability. He wasn't the man I had once married. He was someone else now, someone who had been shattered by the consequences of his own actions. "I don't think we have anything to talk about, James," I said, my voice cold but steady. He didn't leave. Instead, he sat down across from me, ignoring my reluctance. "I know what I've done to you. I know I can't undo the damage. But I need you to understand something." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. "You think this is about you, don't you? You think this is about your guilt, your regret. Well, it's not. It's about me. I don't need you in my life anymore. You've already taken everything I had." He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "No, James. You've already had your chance. You think you can just waltz back into my life and make everything better? It's over. You've lost. And I'm done." He didn't fight me. He didn't try to convince me that he had changed. Instead, he just sat there, staring at me, his eyes filled with something: guilt, sorrow, maybe even a hint of hope. But I couldn't be the one to fix him. I couldn't be the one to forgive him. I had already given too much. "I just wanted to say," he began, his voice strained, "that I'm sorry. Truly. For everything. I didn't deserve you. I never did." And with that, he stood up and walked away. I watched him leave, the finality of it settling over me like a weight. The next few days passed in a haze. I had done it. I had exacted my revenge. I had ruined him, just as he had ruined me. But as I sat in my apartment, I began to wonder if it had been worth it. I had expected to feel relief, to feel like I had finally taken control of my life. But instead, I felt like I was stuck in a loop, one that I couldn't escape. I had destroyed the person who had hurt me, but in the process, I had destroyed a part of myself too. It wasn't long before the phone rang again. I saw James's name on the screen, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But something inside me told me I needed to hear what he had to say. I answered. "What is it, James?" "I've lost everything," he said, his voice hoarse. "My career, my reputation, my family, everything I've worked for is gone. And it's my fault." "Good," I replied, my voice sharp. "It's what you deserve." "I know," he said, and there was a long pause. "But I wanted to say one last thing. I know I'll never make things right, but I wanted you to know. I'll always regret what I did to you." I said nothing. I didn't need to say anything. The damage had been done, and we both knew it. The call ended, and I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel relief. I felt nothing. I had taken everything from him. But in the process, I had taken something from myself too. I had won. But I had lost just as much. The days after the phone call with James were quiet. The weight of the silence in my apartment was deafening. For so long, my life had been filled with the noise of pretending, the noise of playing the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect businesswoman. But now, there was nothing left but the echoes of my own thoughts. I had done it. I had taken everything from him, his career, his reputation, his self-respect, and I thought it would feel like victory. But it didn't. It felt like emptiness. The world outside my apartment was still moving. People were still living their lives, still going to work, still attending dinner parties and social events, still pretending that everything was fine. But I knew the truth. My truth. The lie that I had lived for so long had caught up with me, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. I didn't talk to anyone for days. I didn't call my friends. I didn't reach out to anyone who might remind me of the person I used to be. I stayed locked in my apartment, avoiding contact with the world outside. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, an answer maybe. A sign that everything would somehow make sense again. But the more I waited, the more it became clear. I wasn't going to find any easy answers. I didn't even know if I wanted them. I wasn't sure if I wanted redemption anymore. The way I had gone about this, cold, calculating, ruthless, it had been about more than just exposing James for what he was. It had been about making myself feel powerful. About taking back control over my own life, even if it meant losing everything else. But now that I had control, I didn't know what to do with it. I had burned every bridge I could, and there was nothing left but the ashes of a life that no longer existed. I spent the next few weeks working. That's all I could do. I started taking on design projects again, small ones at first, just to get my feet wet. But nothing really mattered. I didn't care about the work anymore. I didn't care about impressing clients or securing contracts. What had once been my passion had now become a distraction from the truth I had to face. And then, just as I thought I was finally getting used to the quiet, the phone rang again. I looked at the screen and saw his name, James. For a moment, I considered not answering. But I knew I had to. I had never really been able to let go of the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was still something to salvage between us. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding. Claire! His voice came through, soft and hesitant. We need to talk. I didn't say anything for a moment. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say. What could I say to him after everything that had happened? I don't think there's anything left to say, James, I replied, my voice steady but tinged with the bitterness I couldn't quite hide. You've made your choice. And now I've made mine. I know, he said, his voice low. But I can't just walk away from this. I can't pretend that what happened doesn't matter. I felt my chest tighten. He was right. What happened didn't matter. But it didn't change anything. It didn't change the fact that I could never trust him again. It didn't change the fact that the man I had loved was gone, replaced by someone who had been living a double life, deceiving everyone, including me. James, I said, trying to keep my voice as neutral as possible, you don't get to do this. You don't get to come back into my life and expect everything to go back to normal. You made your choice. You're with her now. And I'm done. Claire, he started, but I cut him off. No, I said firmly. I've heard enough. I hung up the phone and let the silence take over once more. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just empty. He had been the center of my world for so long, but now, I couldn't even bring myself to care. I had taken everything from him, and yet it didn't fill the void. It just made it worse. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotion. I had what I thought I wanted, revenge, closure, control, but what I didn't expect was the toll it would take on me. I had spent so long building a life that was perfect, but in the end, it had been nothing more than a house of cards. And now that everything had come crashing down, I was left standing in the rubble, wondering who I was without the illusion. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't keep living this lie, pretending I was fine, pretending I had everything under control. The truth was that I was broken, just like James. We had both lost everything, and now we were both left to pick up the pieces. One afternoon, I found myself walking through the park near my apartment. I didn't know why I went there. I wasn't trying to clear my head, I wasn't trying to find any answers. I just needed to be somewhere else. As I walked, I saw families, couples, people walking their dogs. They looked happy, content. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that I wasn't one of them. I wasn't part of the world I had once been so eager to fit into. I had built my life on a lie, and now I had to live with the consequences. I stopped by a bench and sat down, staring at the ground. The tears came, then, slowly at first, then all at once. The weight of everything I had done, everything I had lost, crashed over me. I had made so many mistakes. I had hurt so many people, including myself. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if I even could. The next day, I decided to go to my lawyer's office. I had made the decision. The divorce had been finalized, the settlement papers signed. I had gotten everything I wanted out of the process, my share of the assets, my part of the business, the house. But something was still missing. As I sat in the lawyer's office, staring at the paperwork in front of me, I realized I wasn't just finishing up a legal process. I was closing a chapter of my life. And I didn't know what the next chapter would look like. The day I finally left James for good, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. I had spent so long thinking that once I had everything, I would be happy. But now, standing at the crossroads of my own future, I realized that happiness wasn't something I could find in material things, in revenge, or in the perfect life I had built. Happiness, I realized, was something I had to build from within. And that would take time. The weeks after I finalized the divorce felt like an endless blur. Every morning, I would wake up in the same apartment, the walls still unfamiliar to me, as if I were living in someone else's life. The space felt too big, too empty. I tried to fill it with work, with plans for the future, but nothing seemed to stick. The quiet was overwhelming. The constant hum of the city outside my window was a distant reminder that the world was still moving, still living, while I was here, alone with the consequences of my own choices. I threw myself into my career again, trying to distract myself from the wreckage I had left behind. I had always been a passionate designer, and the work was familiar, comforting in its own way. But it didn't feel like enough. It didn't make me forget the person I had become or the brokenness I carried inside. The anger I had once felt toward James had faded, replaced by a deeper sense of loss, a loss of myself. There were moments, especially late at night, when I would replay the conversations, the arguments, the moments of betrayal, trying to make sense of it all. But the more I tried to understand, the more I realized that there were no answers, no neat conclusions. James had done what he had done, and I had reacted the way I did. We were both to blame for the mess we had made. One night, as I was sorting through some old files in my office, I came across a letter. It was addressed to me from the law firm that had been handling the divorce. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just another document to deal with. But as I opened it and read the contents, my stomach dropped. It was an email confirmation, a follow-up from the private investigator I had hired months ago to gather information on James. I had instructed the investigator to look into James's finances, his dealings, and anything that could be used to make sure I walked away with a fair settlement. But the email contained something I hadn't expected. In the middle of the report I read, "I've uncovered some disturbing information regarding James's financial transactions. There is evidence of offshore accounts, money laundering, and several investments linked to businesses under investigation for fraudulent activity. The information provided will likely have major legal implications." I felt my pulse quicken. I reread the sentence over and over, trying to make sense of it. Money laundering? Fraud? I had known James had secrets, but this was something else entirely. The world I had walked away from, the man I had once trusted, the life I had once loved, was built on a foundation of lies much deeper than I had imagined. He wasn't just a cheater. He wasn't just a liar. He had been a criminal, hiding his illegal activities under the guise of a successful businessman. I stared at the screen, the realization slowly sinking in. My stomach churned with a sickening sense of betrayal. I had exposed his affair. I had destroyed his reputation. But now I had the power to destroy him completely. This wasn't just about ending a marriage anymore. This was about exposing James for who he truly was, a fraud. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. The decision was clear, but I wasn't sure how far I was willing to go. I had already taken so much from him. I had torn apart the life we had built together. But this was different. This wasn't just personal. This was a legal matter. This was something that could affect not just James but the people he had manipulated and harmed. I thought about what I wanted out of this. Revenge? Justice? Or was it something else, something deeper, something I wasn't ready to face? The truth was, I didn't know. But one thing was clear: James wasn't going to get away with this. The next few days were a whirlwind of decisions. I met with my lawyer, prepared the evidence, and started to make a plan. It wasn't enough for me to simply expose James. I wanted him to feel the full weight of what he had done, not just to me, but to everyone he had lied to, everyone he had betrayed. I contacted the authorities. I contacted the media. I knew I couldn't be the only one who had been taken in by his facade. There had to be others. There had to be victims who had been hurt by his lies, his illegal activities. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to sit idly by while he continued to live his life without consequences. If I had to burn his world to the ground, I would. The first wave of the fallout came quickly. James's business started to unravel, and the legal implications of his activities began to surface. The investigators dug deeper, uncovering more evidence of his crimes. His once impressive company began to crumble under the weight of the truth. Clients pulled out. Investors pulled back. People began to distance themselves from him, and the world he had carefully built began to crumble. But it didn't end there. The media caught wind of the story, and soon, the world knew about James's illegal dealings. The headlines were everywhere: James Edwards, business tycoon exposed for fraud and money laundering, and it was all my doing. It was exactly what I had wanted. I wanted him to suffer the consequences of his actions. I wanted the world to see him for the man he truly was. And yet, as the days passed and I watched his world fall apart, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had taken everything from him. But in doing so, I had lost something too. As James's empire continued to collapse, I found myself at a crossroads. I had done what I had set out to do. I had exposed him. I had taken everything from him. But now, as I watched his world implode, I realized that the damage wasn't just to him. It had destroyed everything I once believed in. What had I achieved? I had destroyed James, but in doing so, I had destroyed a part of myself as well. The vengeance I had sought had left me hollow. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel justice. I just felt empty. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, staring at the city skyline, I realized something. Revenge had consumed me. It had driven me to this point, to the point where I had sacrificed everything for the sake of justice. But now, it was over. James was ruined. His empire was gone. And I was left with nothing. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The skyline had once felt comforting to me, a symbol of the life I had carefully crafted. But now, it felt like an unyielding reminder of the wreckage I had left behind. I had destroyed everything: James, his business, our life. I had exposed his lies, and yet, I felt no satisfaction. I felt only an overwhelming emptiness. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in on me. I had done everything I set out to do. James had lost everything: his business, his reputation, his freedom. But in the process, I had lost myself. Revenge had consumed me. I thought it would bring closure, but instead, it had left me hollow, as if I had torn apart the very fabric of who I was. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the messages from my lawyer. The case was progressing. The papers were filed, and James was facing legal charges for his fraudulent activities. But none of it mattered. None of it could fill the void. The divorce had been finalized. The settlement had been made. But as the dust settled, I found myself asking one question: what now? I had isolated myself from everyone. The few friends I had left were too afraid to reach out, too uncertain of who I had become. Lena had tried to call me a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. I couldn't bring myself to face anyone, least of all myself. I was ashamed. I had become a woman I barely recognized, a woman who had sacrificed everything for the sake of vengeance. A woman who had torn apart her life in the pursuit of justice. I had been so focused on exposing James, on making him pay for what he had done, that I never considered the cost. I had thought I was reclaiming control, but now, I realized I had lost control of everything, including myself. A week passed before I decided to leave the apartment. I needed a change of scenery, something to get me out of this self-imposed prison. I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I was no longer the woman who had been married to James. I wasn't the woman who had plotted her revenge. I was someone else now. But I didn't know who. I stopped at a small cafe near the edge of town, a quiet place where I could sit and think without the weight of the world pressing down on me. I ordered coffee, and as I sat there alone, I allowed myself to breathe for the first time in weeks. I didn't know how to rebuild my life. I didn't know if I even wanted to. I had spent so many years trying to create the perfect world, and when I finally got it, it all fell apart. But maybe that was the point. Maybe I had been chasing perfection for so long that I had forgotten what it meant to simply live, to just be. I spent the next few days walking around the city, aimlessly wandering, trying to find a sense of peace. I started visiting old places, places I had once enjoyed before my life became a series of carefully constructed lies. I went to the park where I used to walk with the children, the coffee shop where I had met James for the first time. Every corner of the city held memories of the person I once was, and yet none of it felt familiar anymore. I found myself at the edge of the city, standing on a quiet street, looking at the old house James and I had once bought together. The windows were dark now, the lawn overgrown, the house a shell of what it used to be. It was no longer the home we had dreamed of. It was a symbol of everything we had lost, of everything I had destroyed. And for the first time, I understood the full weight of the consequences. The revenge I had sought had come at a cost far greater than I had ever imagined. I had torn apart a life, but in the process, I had torn apart something even more precious, my own soul. It was then that I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would magically get better. I had to confront my own role in all of this. I had to take responsibility for the choices I had made, for the lies I had told, for the ways I had hurt the people around me, including James. I called Lena, and for the first time in weeks, I answered her call. She was worried about me. She didn't understand everything, but she knew something had changed. She knew I was struggling. "I don't know what to do anymore, Lena," I said, my voice shaky. "I thought I wanted this. I thought I wanted revenge. But now I don't know who I am. I don't know what I've become." "You don't have to be perfect, Claire," she said softly. "You never were. You just need to find a way to forgive yourself." "Forgive myself?" The words felt foreign. "How can I forgive myself for what I've done? For everything I've destroyed?" "You start by taking responsibility," Lena said. "By owning your actions and making amends where you can. You can't undo what's been done, but you can move forward. You can choose to be different." It was the first time in weeks that I felt a spark of hope. For so long, I had thought that revenge would be the thing that made everything right. But Lena was right. Revenge hadn't healed anything. It had only deepened the wounds. What I needed was to rebuild, not just my life, but myself. I took her advice to heart. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I had a long road ahead of me, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of facing the consequences of my actions. I wasn't afraid of the mistakes I had made. I couldn't change the past, but I could change how I moved forward. I went back to the apartment that night, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The weight of the past hadn't lifted, but it no longer felt suffocating. I knew that I wasn't going to be the same person I had been before. The woman who sought revenge, who sought perfection. I was going to be someone new, someone who learned from the past and used it to build a better future. James had lost everything, but so had I. We were both left with the wreckage of our lives, but I wasn't going to let it define me. It was time to move forward. It was time to rebuild, not just my career or my life, but my soul. Thank you for being with us on the Hidden Truths. If you enjoyed this, leave a like, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. The secrets are waiting to be revealed. See you soon.